You can edit designs using the Stitch tool, and it allows you to individually select one or more stitches and then either delete stitches, add stitches, or move stitches. And so essentially, when you have embroidery stitches on your screen, if you want to individually interact with the actual stitches, you need to turn on what's known as the Stitch tool or stitch mode. And so it's over here on the left in the sort of toolbars at the top. It says the Stitch tool, and so I'm going to click on the Stitch tool, and you'll notice that the workspace, it changes a little bit. The slow redraw tool went from the top kind of down to the bottom, and it allows you to interact with the individual stitches. Now, maybe I'll just zoom in more closely over as part of the design, and just notice that as I choose my mouse, that it highlights the actual stitches that I'm going over. And you can literally select any one of those stitches and click on it to select it and move it to anywhere that you want it to be. And so it's very easy to find an individual stitch. You could get very zoomed in, and I'm using the scroll wheel on my mouse to zoom. But of course, you have sort of like the zoom menu here that you can use to zoom in, as well as the zoom tool to click. And then you could click with your left mouse to get closer, or right click to kind of get further away. You can also click and drag a box to zoom to a specific area. And then when you go back to stitch mode, you're able to very easily see, the individual stitches. And if you had some kind of special effect that you wanted to achieve, you could very easily do that. And you can also click and drag to select all of these stitches at the same time. And now I can move all of those stitches together at the same time. You can also delete an individual stitch. If I click on that stitch, I can just click on delete on my keyboard to delete it. In fact, I can just keep clicking delete and it'll delete the next stitch and the next stitch. I can use the arrows on my keyboard to move back and forth, but if I hold down the control key on my keyboard, I can use the arrows to move forward or backwards one stitch at a time through the design. And then when I have a stitch selected, I could click delete to delete it. When I have a stitch selected, I can click and drag to move it. And when I have a stitch selected, I could right click to see a secondary menu, which gives me the option to insert a stop or add new stitches after or before. And so if I say add after, notice that it sort of attaches to the previous stitch and the next stitch, and I could click and click and click and draw in new stitches as I want them. And when I'm done, I can right click to stop drawing those or inserting those new stitches. And so this is known as editing stitches in sort of like a stitch mode. And one thing to know is that when you select something like embroidery text and the software considers it a text segment, if you make stitch edits, those are not necessarily going to stay. If I come in and decide to make changes to the size or the density or the underlay or the type of stitching, if I make any change at all in the properties box on this text and I click apply, it will make new stitches, and at that time I would lose the edited stitches that I had made. And so notice if I click apply and I don't even change anything, it regenerates those stitches and I lose all of my stitch edits. So on that note, one of the things that you'll be learning about with the Floriani software is the difference between, real set text segments that say text, and when you select on them, you can change the font or the actual letters. But how we also have the ability to save our design into what is kind of considered stitches. So notice if I right click, I could say to preserve this text as stitches. Now, understand that I might want to save the design first as a WAF file and then maybe make a second copy of it so that I still have the original, text. Because once I choose preserve as stitches, and let's just go ahead and click on that, I want you to notice that in my sequence view, it now says that this text is stitches and not a text segment. And unlike the one below it that says, Fusion, that one, I still have the ability to change the text and I still have the ability to change the font. But the one that we preserved as stitches, it's now like it's simply embroidery stitches, and this little software no longer knows what font was used. And that is good if you want to make stitch edits and save them. And so if you want to go into the stitch mode, select a number of stitches and move them, and then have that never get lost, then that would be why you would preserve this as stitches. And that's why I said you might want to make a second copy that has the Floriani word as a true, text segment, so that if you need to come back to the WAF file and make changes later, you could. But at this point, I can easily change the Fusion to a new font, but I have changed Floriani into text. And so we'll learn more about text. We'll also learn more about converting stitches into outlines, or converting outlines into stitches, which is essentially what we did. But in this video, I really just wanted to explain that you have the ability to use the stitch tool to go into what's known as stitch mode. And when you're in stitch mode, you can interact with the individual stitches of your design and either move them, add them, or delete them. Something that's helpful for doing that work is over on the left down in the viewing toolbar, there's an option to turn on the stitch points. And notice when I turn those stitch points on that every needle point kind of got a little bit of a highlight. It's a little darker. And if I turn off 3D, it makes them even more noticeable. So notice when I turn off 3D and turn off stitch points that I have kind of more sort of computer generated thinner lines. 3D makes the lines thicker. If you turn off 3D and then turn on stitch points, you can really see the stitches, and it makes it easy to select a stitch and make some kind of a small change to the way the design sews. So another thing about the stitch mode is when you turn on stitch mode, down at the bottom you get the sort of colors of your design in a sort of redraw bar, but this could also be used to isolate the colors of your design. So if you wanted to sort of move the needle to a specific point, you can sort of drag through your design. Anyhow, we'll learn more about editing designs using stitch mode in future videos, but for today, just know that when you click back on the select tool, you're no longer in stitch mode, and it's sort of an on-off thing. So when you're using your select tool, you can select things like shapes, but not individual stitches. And if you want to interact with the individual stitches, that's when you turn on the stitch tool. And so that's what this video is about, an introduction to editing designs using the stitch mode.